So hello everyone, and welcome to the Vallum Chapbook launch. I'm 𝙒𝙖𝙪𝙾, the managing editor of Vallum and your host for this evening. So thank you so much for tuning in and for being part of this celebration and helping us usher these 4 new beautiful chapbooks into the world. These just arrived from the printer today and they turned out beautifully, so we're so thrilled. And we're looking forward to sending these to our authors who have yet to see them in print, and to those of you who have already ordered your copies, they'll be arriving soon in the mail. So we're very happy and pleased with the print edition. So I would like to first, on behalf of everyone at Vallum, extend a heartfelt thank you to our authors. We consider ourselves very lucky to have such talented and accomplished poets included in our catalog this year. So thank you for entrusting us with your poems. It's a real privilege to publish them. We're also so lucky that all the authors are available to be here with us this evening to celebrate and share with us their work. So in a few minutes, we'll have the pleasure and privilege of hearing readings from Joe Neubert, who is the 2nd place winner of the Vallum Chapbook Award for his chapbook DC Poems. We also have Matthew James Weigel, who is the 1st place winner for the Vallum Chapbook Award, and this is his chapbook, It Was Treaty, It Was Me. Also Paul Muldoon with his new chapbook, The Bannisters, and Nicole Brossard with the re-release of her chapbook, 𝙒𝙤𝙚𝙢𝙪𝙡 𝙈. So 𝙒𝙤𝙚𝙚𝙢𝙪𝙢, this in fact came out first in 2013, and it immediately sold out. And this year is in fact Vallum's 20th anniversary. So among other things we had planned for this year, most of which had to be postponed, we thought it would be very special to re-release Nicole Brossard's chapbook. So we're thrilled to bring this gem back into the world, as well as our new titles. Before we begin with the readings, for those of you who aren't familiar with Vallum, I'd like to say a few words about what it is that we do. For those of you who've heard this before, which is quite possibly many of you, I will be brief. So Vallum was founded in 2000 by Joshua Auerbach and Eleni Zizamatos and began as a biannual poetry and print magazine, Vallum Contemporary Poetry. And as I mentioned, this year marks our 20th year anniversary as a poetry publication. Issues of Vallum magazine are always themed, with this year's themes being appropriately and coincidentally home and space, 2 subjects which we all know a lot about these days. Our forthcoming issue, which is coming out the spring of 2021, is Invisibility. So over the years, Vallum has grown from the print magazine and also now includes Vallum's digital magazine, which in addition to featuring content from the print magazine in digital form, also publishes extra content such as poems and interviews, reviews, and essays, as well as audio and video recordings of poets reading their work. So it is a distinct entity from the print magazine and well worth checking out. Also, in 2003, with Vallum recognizing poetry's unique value in education and the community, we began an outreach program, Poetry for Our Future. So for the past 17 years, this program has been delivering poetry workshops for free in underserved communities with the understanding that poetry is a tool for literacy, self-expression, healing, and community building. So this program now reaches 200 to 500 individuals per year. So we're really proud of this work we're doing through this project in the community. And finally, Vallum's additional publishing project, and why we've all tuned in this evening, the Vallum Chapbook Series, which was launched in 2005. So in addition to the poets we're celebrating tonight, the series has also published the works of poets such as Fanny Howe, Franz Wright, George Eliot Clarke, Banu Kapil, A.F. Moritz, Jan Zwicky, Don Mackay, and that's just to name a few. In 2016, this was the inaugural year of the Vallum Chapbook Award. So this award, what we do is we choose usually one outstanding chapbook to be published as part of the Vallum Chapbook Series. This year, we were so impressed, we ended up choosing 2 chapbooks. So congratulations to both Matthew James Weigel and Joe Neubert for their outstanding poetry chapbooks. On that note, I will be introducing our first poet reading for us this evening. So Joe Neubert will be reading from his chapbook, DC Poems. So I thought I would first read an excerpt from the description from the back of his chapbook. So Joe Neubert's new chapbook is a collection of snapshots from everyday life, where the poet is the observer, watching and wondering from a distance. With sparse language and precise images, Neubert records the second of the day before they're gone. So Joe Neubert was born in Georgia and is currently living in Washington, D.C. So please welcome Joe Neubert.
Hello, everybody. My name is Joe. I'm going to read you some poems. Kind of terribly underprepared for this. My apologies. So, I guess I'll just pick one and start reading it. Kind of like, like picking a card out of a deck of cards. We'll see how it goes. If it's a queen or if it's like a 3 of spades, who knows? So we'll just start with this first one here. And let me know what you think somehow. Send me a message somewhere. I don't know. Okay. Poem. Here's the poem. It's untitled, so there's no title. It's just a poem. Here we go. A bus full of people's problems. Pilgrims all pursuing life across days and state lines crawling. Trawling, panning, handling, panhandles, washing dirt from dirt and busted rock, searching for something shiny. That's it. That's the poem. I got 10 minutes. So that's one. What else? What other one should we do? My wife is here next to me. She's hiding. But she's very beautiful, and she's 23 weeks pregnant. World. So that's tremendously exciting to me. And it's a huge inspiration for a lot of this work. Not the baby, because we didn't know about that when I wrote these poems, but now he is, and she sure is. How about this one? Okay, here's another poem. This is poem number 2 of the set tonight. How am I doing? Okay. She said I'm doing all right. Again, this one also has no title, but it will be in the chapbook, available by Vallum, that, from what I've seen, looks really beautiful. And I would highly encourage you to pick it up. Right now, she's in Maryland somewhere, grading papers and trying very hard not to be what she is. Right now, I'm sure, bus sick. 1 hour in to a hopefully 5-hour ride, it's stop and go on the Washington Deluxe. And meanwhile, I walk home and look left down the car mechanic alleyway, red brick leading to Honey, covered National Cathedral. And I swallow and digest a sticky sweet November sunset of leaves, black against a heaven of pumpkin and plum. Please try to hold your applause to the end. I appreciate that. What's the next one? Wait, there's one in particular I want you guys to hear. So I'll read that one to you, because that's what I want to read. And this one too. The Tao according to buttons. One who's cut. We'll fix that in post. The Tao according to buttons. One who does not meow will go unfed. Therefore the sage meows when she is hungry, and sleeps when she is full. This is the way of the 𝙬. Here's another one. It's already Saturday, a caterpillar, crawling over pebbles of memory. Witch the special earth with your own golden dreams, and don't ever forget that the sun is always shining, even when it's not. What's the time? 5 minutes remaining. Okay, great. Now I'd like to read one outside of the chapbook, if I might. Lee said that we could, so I'm going to do it. Let's see. This is one that might not be any good, but I'm going to read it because I'm here in front of you all. And so give me 1 second. Let me find it. There's a lot of words in this book. Okay, here we go. Let's see how this goes. I haven't even read this one myself in a little while, so there might not even be real words in this. Let's check it out. Sonny boy, you've reached the point at which you can wiggle your toes and fingers, bend your arms and kick. Your feet inside your mother while you practice breathing. Your lungs now, if you are the size of a navel orange, must be the pods of little peas, and just as green, and soft and delicate, and innocent, for now, of the dooms of love you will move through once born. Into this world that man, your species, your inheritance, I'm sorry, has wrecked. With our brains and our internet connections, and our dogma and our thirst. But at present, that's none of your concern, buddy. My son unborn, my little ox goat. So practice your breaths and stretch your articulating limbs. While your mother and father take tests, stick those swabs up our noses, eat takeout, quesadillas, enchiladas, pupusas, watch K-dramas, Ozu, Tati, and Vine compilations, correct our sleeping positions, and try, from the fabric of our shared endeavors, to weave for you a cushion of love, so that, in a matter of months, when the stars and donuts and sleepy bees of time scatter the days of the misty calendar, and April comes, as April will come, and you are born into this world of man and woman and human, you will be ready. Okay, and I think that's pretty much my time. And well, what do you think? Pretty much it. 2 minutes remaining. I'm going to cede the floor so to avoid making 2 minutes more of a fool of myself. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Joe. I love how your poetry is a means of collecting small sacred acts that make up a life. For example, a father steals mustard, a woman grades papers, clocks wink, limestone sighs. So absolutely lovely. Thank you. And congratulations on your pregnancy.
Thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you. And we'll talk to you later.
Okay, great.
Okay, so our second reader for this evening is the first place winner of this year's Vallum Chapbook Award, Matthew James Weigel, for his chapbook, It Was Treaty, It Was Me. Again, I'm going to read a brief excerpt from the back of the chapbook, just describing it. It was treaty, it was me feels like a collage, drawing on government records, archival images, and his own family history. Matthew James Weigel blends prose and poetry to look at how John A. Macdonald and its government used treaties to dispossess Indigenous peoples of their lands. Weigel juxtaposes the machinations of the Canadian government with other versions of the story. Official history bumps up against memories recorded in the body, exposing corruption and violence. These are not just questions of what happened, but who gets to tell the story of a past that bleeds into present. So Matthew James Weigel is a Dene and Métis poet and artist pursuing an MA in English at the University of Alberta. His words and art have been published by people like Bookhug, the Mamawi Project, and his first self-published chapbook, Whether They Took Treaty or Not, They Were Subject to the Laws of the Dominion. It's held in the Bruce Peel Special Collections. So please welcome Matthew James Weigel.
Hi, thanks for having me. 1876 at 𝙭𝙗𝙗 on the North Saskatchewan River. Alexander Morris, the commissioner for Treaty Number 6, he said, "I will ask the interpreter to read to you what has been written, and before I go away, I will have a copy made to leave with the principal chiefs." Did you know where the river would take you when you first saw it? Watched it bend toward you, wrap you up in school and bridges in a loop. Watched it swim away, even as it still holds you. Wait here. This is where we'll meet, at 𝙭𝙗𝙗. Did you know how much you would resemble an ocean? Gather everything. Who you are, wait and gather. Wait and gather. These are things the river says here. Wait and gather. Wait and gather. Stories, gather, witness, gather, sharing. Touch the pencil, make your mark, negotiate, agree. Did you know that when you wrote this down, the river would remember it? We drowned the land of England in the waters of 𝙭𝙤𝙣𝙤𝙤. It was clearly understood. There was no ownership of land. So clearly does the land, in fact, own me. My water from the river, my nitrogen, a buffalo protein. I am a flesh-bound manuscript of what this place might say. Hear in it how family signed the treaties. Live them. Love the land. This place, this creek, this river. Make a sediment of me. Make mud. Make silt and send it on its way, Saskatchewan, Athabasca, Slave, Mackenzie to the sea. If you could take the dirt of England and rejuvenate the ground, if you could manage, as was always done, as people in the Beavers manage, take the soil of England, cast it in the lakes across the north, ball it up in handfuls. Homes, dams. Hold the land of England to account for Canada, for the bishopry, for the company, and record it in the manuscript of the Northwest. And then write these things that we are saying down. Write them on 2 sheets, one for you and one for me to keep. Hold these things we learn and teach them on. Tell the story written in the mud, recorded in the river, and copied days downstream. Then I would hope you carry safe your copy. And when you reach the sea, find England, compare it with this copy we have made, and stir the ocean with it. 1876, Treaty Number 6. I wake up at 6 a.m. to a weight on my chest, and I massage it until it says the word treaty. 1876, and my uncle is at 𝙭𝙗𝙗. Signs the treaty with a leftward slant. It is August, and the aspens bend in the wind. Dreamt I was in a library again, walking down the stairs into the basement, walking down the stairs into the earth. I see the treaty parchment on a wooden table. It comes as no surprise the land herself holds this knowledge. 1921, Treaty Number 11. My lungs are full of spruce trees, but otherwise I am empty. I'm here to witness. 1921, and grandfather working for the company in Fort Providence. It is June, and that far north the sun would not set on the British Empire. He signs the treaty with a heavy ink. Dreamt I was a library again. It is an all or nothing calling. I have the language for it. I have bones. But otherwise, I am formless before the 7 a.m. alarm, held loose on bird song, briefly between the low notes on their way to the water. I am bounded by the geese and punctuated by the dwindling of the caribou. 2020, witness continued. Dreamt I was a river again, a thread of a glacier unwinding itself in slow motion, slow enough to dip hands in and drink. I love to talk about my family. So does my dad. He tells all kinds of stories, and I can see how much joy it brings him to tell me about our family. At Fort Providence, my great-great-grandfather signed Treaty Number 11, and I found a photo of him and his family online one day. I was really excited to share this with my dad. He's just so proud of the work that I'm doing. When I showed him the image, he got quiet, tears in his eyes, and with his hand held to his face. You see, this photograph is not in the possession of my family, but in the archives of the University of Alberta. I've never seen the photo myself, neither has my father or anyone else in my family. I found it archived online. The image has an item number and subject taxonomy that links to family and personal life and Aboriginal peoples, and I assume that it sits in a box on a shelf. We do have some good photos, though. There's one of me on my auntie's bearskin rug, and Dad really loves to tell this story because I was a very little baby and I didn't have a diaper on, and he just laughs and he laughs, and you can imagine how much my aunt was freaking out. These days, I do a lot of work with treaty as a scholar or a poet or whatever exactly it is that I am. And I just have so many big questions. Questions about things like whatever Canada is or what treaty is. And definitely one thing that keeps coming up is, what is the company, the Hudson's Bay Company? I guess in some ways it's easier to tackle these big questions than the more specific ones. Like, I might ask, what is the company, rather than asking, who am I to the company? Who am I to the fur trade? Who is this naked baby on a bearskin rug, surrounded by laughter and aunties? Who am I to a country in its infant nationalism? Something in a checkbox, singular and compact. Narrower than a column of how many beaver pelts were shipped away to England in a year. Who am I to that company of adventurers of England when no fewer than 5 generations of my family worked for them? So I go to hudsonsbay.com and it says, join us. Your adventure, it starts here. HBC is a diversified retailer focused on driving the performance of high-quality stores and their omni-channel platforms, unlocking the value of real estate holdings. We have a history of making history. HBC has been excelling for hundreds of years. We are proud of our significance. Our iconic blankets are the fabric of Canada, an unofficial symbol. We've grown and adapted for centuries, passionate, redefining, experience the opportunity of a limitless landscape. Thank you so much, everyone. Marcy Cho. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I just want to add an idea that came up while I was reading your chapbook and this idea of bearing witness. I just think it's so important, this idea of who is witnessing these violent acts. And I definitely had the feeling while I was reading your chapbook that I was in a position of witness. And I think that's really important and interesting. So thank you. Thank you for sharing your work and bringing it to Vallum.
My pleasure.
Okay, and we'll talk to you later. Okay, so our next reader this evening is Nicole Brossard, reading from her magnificent chapbook, 𝙒𝙤𝙚𝙢𝙪𝙡. So as I mentioned, this is a re-release, and a few words about her chapbook. So blending meaning and language, thought and ideas, English and French, 𝙒𝙤𝙚𝙢𝙪𝙡 intimately confuses understanding and the basis by which we judge our own reality. Writing as if the words themselves could vanish, Brossard fires question after question as if to explore the very nature of existence beyond time and presence. Born in Montreal, poet, novelist, and essayist, Nicole Brossard has published more than 30 books. Her work has been influential for a generation of poets and feminists and has been widely acknowledged and translated. She recently was awarded the Griffin Lifetime Recognition Award 2019. Her most recent book in English is Avant Désir, or Avant Desire, a Nicole Brossard reader edited by 𝙋𝙤𝙪𝙡 and 𝙒𝙤𝙪𝙡𝙪. So please welcome Nicole Brossard.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation to be with you tonight. I wrote the text of 𝙒𝙤𝙚𝙢𝙪𝙡 in English, so there's no translator at the moment. A second, a trace, a second trace, time mapping spacious thoughts. It went as far as a notion, as real as a lemon, a species on screen, a gentle touch, a collision, verbs on time. Halfway through the book, time came back with a question, a trace, a spiral ready to expand meaning, a tilt in the wandering. How do you remove time from meaning so meaning grows roots in sound to exist beyond sounds? Halfway through your notes, you spoke louder in the mic, so as to hear new micro subs in yourself. Halfway, like markers, des silences nous absorbent, ready to crack down on us. Not so strange, but possibly so if I surrender with morning sounds, when the mouth rocks, one language with another. Halfway could serve as a bookmark, a slightly ambiguous trace of passage, no real physical space in between, but a sense of words falling recto verso on one another. Anecdote, still vacillating top of narrative. At this point, language shifts as we read Percy, brebis, and ontologie. For I was not refraining myself about the water needed in beauty, la folle avoine des sens, the floating reliability. No matter the scars, the millennium, at this point, mint, lamb, you and me, we all dive into the alphabet to watch electric verbs spinning around, dye, ink. At this point, again, it's time for notes and translation. Close reading had been an idea. Art started searching beyond gravity, spelling too fast, the use of oneself, strongly related to la petite langue chaude du langage. Les 3 dernières pages furent écrites en français à cause des voyages qui avalent spontanément une partie de notre être, la substance des comparaisons. The last 3 lines are written in French for traveling spontaneously swallows part of our being, not to be compared. Je dois décider du nombre de fois si le mot nuit peut se reproduire seul et immense. On vit avec des yeux, on vit avec de la nuit. Je dois me rapprocher au figuré de l'intime. La dernière page est pleine de douceur et de panique, avec des verbes de collision et d'origine. Je me tiens infiniment aérienne avant les questions, non loin des rivages, où de main en main on se passe des temps de verbes et d'altérité. Et je crois que j'ai le temps de vous lire quelques courts poèmes, je pense. This time the translation is by Erin Murray and Robert Messel. Encore. It's never enough. Each time you roll hope around in your mouth to appease too many ideas, their opposite lit, a taste for curves and for everywhere at once, with the option of crying out, should that and utopia start to collide. In full flight, if I spread my arms, my air slow in the oxygen, I claim there are vast laws beyond cities and sepulchres, voice ribbon, eyes blade. Tonight, if you lean your face close and civilization stretches out at the end of your arms, tonight, if in full flight you catch my image, say it was from afar like a die in the night. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Nicole. C'est magnifique d'entendre votre poésie à haute voix, surtout dans les deux langues. In this particular collection, I love how you use the two languages to deepen meaning. That one language doesn't simply stand in for the other. It's really alluring and inspiring to hear your work. So thank you. Okay, so our final reader for this evening is Paul Muldoon, reading from his chapbook, The Banisters. And again, I'm gonna read a description of his chapbook. So, The Banisters explores the origins of the objects, people, and places that populate our lives. Muldoon examines these histories with equal parts confidence and curiosity, holding them up like artifacts to light. Considering the world through the lens of what could best be described as a kind of particle theory, Muldoon argues that although things may change over time, a vestige of their existence will endure, an archive preserved in their original makeup. Paul Muldoon was born in County Armagh in 1951. He now lives in New York. A former radio and television producer for the BBC in Belfast, he has taught at Princeton University for more than 30 years. He is the author of 13 collections of poetry, including most recently Frolic and Detour, which came out in 2019. Among his awards are the 1972 Eric Gregory Award, the 1980 Sir Geoffrey Faber Memorial Award, the 1994 T.S. Eliot Prize, the 1997 Irish Times Poetry Prize, the 2003 Pulitzer Prize, the 2003 Shakespeare Prize, the 2016 European Prize for Poetry, and the 2017 Queen's Gold Medal for Poetry. He is a Fellow of the Royal Society for Literature and a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Please welcome Paul Muldoon.
Merci, bonsoir. It's such a delight to be here, and what a fabulous evening. It's such a thrill to hear poems by all our my fellow chapbookers. I think the chapbook may be the greatest medium. I must say I do love it, and I'm really honored to be part of this series of chapbooks. I know that one of the themes, or perhaps the theme, for the Vallum anniversary had to do with home and space. And it occurs to me that this first poem I'll read actually takes off from notions of home and space, the bits and pieces of a home, indeed the bits and pieces of the architecture of a house that are repurposed and find themselves in new spaces and places. That's really would be a thumbnail sketch of what's happening in this poem, which started with an image of the repurposing of banisters for rifle stocks during the Great War, World War I. And I thought that was just a very powerful image. And then I began to think of when I was a kid in Northern Ireland, you'd be walking down a street and the railings would have been sawn off during World War II, I think, actually, perhaps, to be repurposed, to use that word again, for ammunition or perhaps munitions. Anyway, I got started on that idea, and of course, as in every case, the poem led me by the nose, and it turns out to be a sonnet for what it's worth. Nothing much, but I'll mention it anyway. So the banisters, and this is the title poem of the Vallum Chapbook. The banisters are ornamental gates and railings that were melted down for rifle barrels, have gained some sort of posthumous renown by unambiguously drawing a line in the sand. The gates and railings are finally taking a firm stand and even more emphatically bringing things to a close. The exit wound is their approximation of a rose or a geranium under gauze on the windowsill. Gangrene, the green and gold of the first full-blown daffodil. Also rendered, so it would even more tellingly rend, was lead stripped from the gutters and flashing, for lead will bend along a spine as it did along a walnut ridge post. What was once an outer sanctum is now the innermost. Shouldered as rifle stocks, after a mere 3 weeks of drill, the banisters are gradually taking another hill. So this next one is set in a village square in somewhere in, I think actually Italy. It's a poem just about a sheet, and it ends with an image of a film being projected onto a sheet. Again, it began with it came to me almost in a dream of seeing a sheet put up in a town square and seeing what transpired. So, I mean, that for me is always one of the great adventures. It's always an adventure to try to write a poem, for me anyway, and I think for most here this evening. That certainly comes across from the poems we've heard, that discovery that one makes. The sheet. We were sitting in a village square not so very much broader than the bridal suite, that overlooked it. The suite where we'd spent at least part of that afternoon extending our modest repertoire of love forays and love feats. Now we made do with playing footsie at a cafe table while pondering fettuccine with sage. Plein air or en plein air? I should have warned you that I was going to try to speak a little French, which is probably a terrible idea for me. Anyway, there it was. You checked your iPhone, a culinary herb native to Southern Europe and the Mediterranean, once thought to grow best in households where the wife is dominant. Even though the supporting evidence was far from scant, this was a theory I must put to rest, given the frantic smoothing out of air by the man and two young boys hoisting a sheet through what was irreparably twilight. A grandfather, and you surmised his two grandsons, were about to run a test on the projector that had only recently become a prominent feature of our lives. It looked very much as if the eggplant was introduced to the West by Alexander the Great. As to whether normal wear and tear could have accounted for the rip in your Himalayan wrap, itself a shade of aubergine in a blend of wool and moire, the jury was still out. Acquainted though we'd been with the fact cellulose nitrate is notoriously unstable, we were nonetheless taken unawares when the reel of film began to disintegrate, even as images of what looked like some of our earlier exploits were thrown up on the screen. And I'll end, I think, with a short poem set in Vermont, a place I've spent many's a summer, and indeed many's a summer took a trip up to Montreal. So it's a pleasure to be with you, even virtually, this evening. And so there's a poem about a moose. I'm sure it's a terrible mistake even to think about of writing a poem about a moose, since it has been done so well by various hands, including, of course, the great Elizabeth Bishop. But, one doesn't necessarily get to choose the poems. The poems choose us if we're terribly lucky. And that's certainly what happened here. So anyway, I'll read it. I mentioned Vidal Sassoon, the famous British hairdresser, at a time when, well, I don't suppose anybody much had been famous as a hairdresser before Vidal Sassoon. Maybe I've got that wrong. But it has a few images from the 1960s, which, alas, I remember. So I'll leave you with this. Cowmoose, Route 125, Ripton, Vermont. A throwback to 1966, what with the Vidal Sassoon bob cut fringe trademarked by Mary Quant, and her coming into her own only at dusk to binge on water lilies in a sunken discotheque. Though you may have her pegged as a wuss, she has scant regard for the predations of bear or coy dog, ranging out across the muskeg to strip a dozen willow trees of their pain-killing bark and shoots. Some nights she's got up in hot pants, others a kind of knitted mohair mini dress set off by platform boots. Merci.
Thank you so much, Paul. You didn't read the last poem in the collection, but I'm going to read the last line of that poem because I think it's a sentiment that's throughout all the poems in this collection and the poems you read tonight. And the line is, in the archaeological museum, there's at least one artifact for which the use is no longer known. And I love this idea. I love it because it sparks not only a sense of loss, but also so much potential. I love that we're able to reimagine and reinvent the world through objects. And I think you capture this very well through this particular collection. So wonderful. Yeah, so thank you so much. This ends the reading part of our evening. Thank you so much to Joe, Matthew, Nicole, and Paul for your fantastic readings. We are going to have a Q&A now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add all the authors to the screen. And if you have a question for any particular author, please note who the question is for. And all you have to do is type it into the comments and I'll be able to read on your behalf the questions you posted. So I'll do that now. So, okay, we're all here, and I'll see if there's any questions from our audience. Not yet. But also, if you have any questions for one another, I do have some questions prepared, one for each of you. So, so if our audience is a little bit shy, I can just launch right into questions. Okay, so maybe I'll do that. So my first question is for Joe. So your collection references many different places, despite being titled DC Poems. So do you see this as a collection about one specific place, or how do you conceptualize themes of place and transit in your collection?
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for that question, Lee. Sorry, I was looking in the chat. I saw a much more important question. It said, why is Joe so handsome?
Sorry.
That's a luck of the draw, buddy. I'm sorry to tell you. No, actually, Justin Grima is very, very fond of Canadian friend of mine. So very happy to see you here, Justin. I hope you heard some of the poems and just didn't chime in just to get a good look at my face. Anyway, the question of kind of like place and deciding the title of the collection, DC Poems. I really just kind of gathered this collection of poems from experiences of my life and different places that I've been and different places that I've traveled to, and I kind of have written them over the span of the last few years in a lot of different places. But once I collected them all, I am happy to say that DC has kind of been one of the more permanent places that I've been living, and it's an absolutely beautiful place to live, and it's full of a lot of contradictions. It's a very difficult city in a lot of ways. It's dealt with a lot. The people here are incredible. They're very resilient, but it's also a city that, like I said, has gone through a lot. So, but as I was looking through the poems, I thought about, everywhere that I had been and how they've come together. And I just thought DC Poems was a pretty good title.
Okay, thank you. So there's a question here for Matthew. I'm gonna post it on the bottom of the screen for those of you at home, so you can read it, and I'll also read it aloud. So for Matthew, do you think of your great grandfather hadn't signed treaties your family would have held onto its heritage for so long, so deeply in the landscape that has become Canada?
That's an interesting question. So when I was small, my dad always talked about how Grandpa signed treaty. It was always a thing that we talked about. but it wasn't the thing that I knew a lot about as like a scholar or an academic. And so there's definitely a lot of things that I've learned, you know, having access to places like archives and records, that a lot of folks in my family don't have. And most of those records are actually a record of violence. I learned a lot about the history of my family through the Métis script system, which was a system kind of parallel to treaty that dispossessed the Métis across the Northwest. And I think that if Canada wasn't so good at keeping records of genocide, I would know a lot less. However, the important parts of my family heritage aren't the violent ones. They're the ones of resilience and connection to place that are completely separate and outside of things like treaty or Métis script.
Okay, thank you. That's I think that's a really important question that was answered. So this next question is for Nicole. Nicole, have you always integrated French and English into your writing, or was it a gradual process?
Well, it is very special. I mean, the text for Vallum, because, well, it happened very often. If I'm asked to publish something in an English magazine, I will start writing in French and say it will be translated later on. But in the meantime, I keep translating myself, and I keep moving between French and English, discovering new paths for the poem and so on. So it's always very exciting to proceed that way. But in order to do that, I need an invitation. Otherwise, of course, I write in French. But as well, I do include a few words in English in my writing, and they are not used as well as, for example, in French they use English words for everything. And they are used because they make a kind of knot in the sentence, and it's useful for me to have that space, and it opens other space as well. So but to proceed the way I did for the chapbook is always very exciting. It's like working with constraint. Some poems you can write giving yourself constraint, and then you first you work, you research, you think longer on certain words because you need more information as well. It depends on the constraint you have given yourself. But one thing interesting that I found is that you are not performing, even if you give yourself a constraint. You remain yourself, and you remain close as well to what's essential to you in terms of being. You remain yourself, even though it concludes sometimes with things that might look performance, but they are not. They are integrated into the writing and the being writing at the same time. Yeah.
Right. I have a part two of that question, Nicole, which is, so do you find that there's differences in terms of what you choose to express in English and what you choose to express in French? If there's different, maybe a different quality to the language, and so certain sentiments can only be expressed in one language versus the other, or?
Well, it doesn't look like this until in the Wandering, because I really remained myself obsessed by language, by sentence, by questions raising from the act of writing in itself. So in that sense, I kept being myself, even though I was writing in a foreign language. The posture most of the time is the same, but it can change depending on the energy, the charge of energy while you're writing. It can reorient the poem in a different way. But no, I think that writing in another language somehow provides for space, for kind of freedom, yes, for another kind of freedom, definitely, absolutely, yes.
Okay, thank you. So I have a question here for Paul. Your juxtapositions are stunning. Do they occur organically, or do you work to construct them?
Thank you so much. You know, I should probably say, I don't know. That's probably the answer to that question, but that's probably not going to be enough. So, you know, I think I think they do occur organically on, you know, as they occur in our day-to-day lives. I mean, this is how I function anyway, and I have a feeling, at least I hope, that most other people function in a similar way, which is you have one thought, one image, and it sort of conjures up another, and then you think about something else, and then you do this, and then you do that, and it's very, I mean, I think that's how we work, and that's certainly how I work, and so, but the juxtapositions, of course, they are organic, but I am conscious, I suppose, of the possibility of interesting things happening when a couple of elements, use a simile from chemistry or metaphor from chemistry, a couple of elements come together, and there's a little chemical reaction. So in a strange way, the more unlikely the juxtapositions are, the more likely they are to be interesting. And this, of course, is at the, I mean, if you think about it, it's at the heart of simile and metaphor making. There's no sense in saying a flea is like a flea. It's just not interesting. But if you say, as John Donne suggests, that a flea is a marriage bed, then you're in business, or at least you're kind of getting into the ballpark of being in business. So I suppose that's he's one of my heroes, and so you know that's partly it's under that influence, and with his really stunning juxtapositions, you know, I suppose I'm interested in trying to do something similar. If I'm lucky enough to have it happen, which it hardly ever does. But anyway, yeah, they're not constructed in that sense. I think it's very hard to make stunning things happen. I think you have to give yourself over to it, and maybe there's a chance. Maybe you have a hope.
I have another question for you, Paul, which is my question. So in a recent interview that we published with you at Vallum, you mentioned that you're fascinated by technologies that are lost and maybe rediscovered. I mentioned this in a comment after your reading. And so you mentioned in particular the horse and the smithy in that interview. And what I'd like to know is if you see the act of rediscovering or reinventing technologies as serving an essential purpose for humanity.
Thank you. You know, I do believe we need to be humble as we go through the world about what we know or what we think we know. And that line that you referred to kindly earlier on, it's actually something I saw in a museum in Thessalonica. It was a museum, and there's a little item in the museum, and it said, use no longer known. And I was fascinated by that here was a little, you know, who knows what it was, a little piece of metal, and nobody really knew what it was for. You know, I'm fascinated by the fact that the Romans had such a sophisticated way of making cement in their jetties. You know, they had figured out the chemistry of various combinations of limes and all the rest of it in a way that we've never been able to figure out, where the more salt water attacks them, the stronger they get. And I mentioned the horse and the smithy in that interview with you because, you know, think of all the knowledge, wisdom that was lost, that has been lost. It's not all lost, but probably some quite a lot has probably been lost just from our losing contact with the horse. Most of us, right? And I'm sure there was all kinds of lore and associated with the horse, which is now generally not so much a feature of our lives. So I think the short answer to that question was yes.
Great, thank you. I also, this idea of knowledge being lost, I think it echoes well with Matthew's chapbook in particular, and what can be gained through these conversations and these works of art, and in terms of inspiring and motivating and empowering dialogue and meaning in the world. So so I see a relationship there. We're gonna have just one last question, and then we're gonna have to wrap it up. And this is a question for all of you. Maybe we can start with Joe, and then Matthew, Nicole, and Paul, if you'd like to respond to it. The question is, can you talk about the creative process underlying your writing of poetry? How do your poems come into being? So I guess it's a pretty good question about process, but I don't know how hard or easy it will be to answer, but we'd love to hear from each of you. So Joe, if you'd like to begin.
Sure, yeah, and I think you know, I would probably just echo Paul's comments from earlier. I just write down some words, and if I like them, I keep them, and if I don't, I throw them out. That's about it. Most of them get thrown out.
Okay. So Matthew, would you like to respond to that question?
Yeah, sure. That's also kind of tied to the question in chat there about the research process for my poems. I would say that all of my work, a lot of my work is actually visually based. So I do a lot of visual poetry, concrete poetry, and art and design, and it all kind of comes together when it works, I suppose. But what I would say is that research is at the foundation of all of that. And usually it requires hours and hours and hours and hours poring over records, documentation, looking at photographs, in some cases going to archives that are very far away, and holding these documents and these things in my hands, and just sort of feeling the weight of them, and looking at the ink, and trying to understand what it is that was going on at the time, but also how that impacts me now and all of the people in between. And so I would say that my process is typically based around that research practice, and then if I'm lucky, then I'll get some poetry or art out of that, and it's more or less successful sometimes than others.
I'd say successful.
Thank you.
So Nicole, can you please respond?
Well, I think that reading is always a source of inspiration, if reading, walking. But, and coming back to what Paul was saying, I think that writing and reading are the most fabulous technologies that we have, and they are within us. So once it is with you, no one can take away that technology unless you suddenly start to prepare another technology, which is the virtual, for example. And so we've got all the material in us to keep on going writing. But will we be doing that in 100 years? I don't know. But for sure, the process varies. Sometimes it is the language which excites me. Sometimes I need to put together some words. I need a sentence, and to read it again so I can figure out what's going on. but it's always related to pleasure, I would say. Most of the time, it's related to pleasure because I enter the world of the act of writing, and it is I'm not important. There's a paragraph that I did not read, but I was saying, well, I'm not interested in me. I'm interested in the kind of I that might come up through language and produce what I call microclimate. Writing somehow, what we're producing with writing is our microclimate of emotion and of thoughts. And those microclimates you can only find in the act of writing, because when we speak, it is too fast. When we think, it is too fast. It's only in the act of writing and rewriting that we can come up with what cannot with what would not have existed without the act of writing, and that's the beauty of writing and existing at the same time.
I love that idea. The idea that writing is an act of both self-discovery and discovery in general. That's lovely. Paul, can you speak to
Just, yeah, very, very briefly, just to pick up on what Nicole was saying there. The self, to put oneself out of the picture, not to do what I try to do is not to have any plan for the poem. I try to figure out what the poem's plan is for me, and so that's the key element. Maybe the key element for me is not knowing what I'm doing. In other words,
I love that too. I wish when I was writing, the poem had better plans for me. Okay, so we've run out of time, so thank you so much. I'm just going to make, before we sign out, I'm just going to make a couple of very quick announcements, one of which is that the Vallum Chapbook Award is currently open for submissions. So if you have a manuscript at home and you'd like to submit it, the deadline is until April 30th of 2021, so you have lots of time, but I thought I'd mention that. And if you haven't already purchased the Vallum, sorry, I want to take off that question, but I can't. I have to find it first, I guess. Anyway, so if you'd like to buy Vallum any of the Vallum chapbooks we're offering a discount for the next few days. So if you visit Vallum at www.vallummag.com, chapbook 2020.html, it is posted on our website, so you don't have to remember that if you can't see the scrolling bar at the bottom. I'm not sure if you can or not, but please buy the chapbooks. They're gorgeous. They're great chapbooks, and of course you'd be supporting our fabulous authors in Vallum. And finally, I'd like to extend some thank yous. So first, I'd like to say thank you to two important people who have been integral to Vallum over the past couple of years and who have had a hand in bringing these particular chapbooks into the world. So Natalie Podema and Rosie Longdector, thank you so much for your time and your enthusiasm and your input. Also, thank you. I have to thank, of course, our funders. So thank you to the Canada Council for the Arts, the Conseil des Arts de Montréal, and la Ministère de la Culture et de Communication du Québec, and as well as our private donors. Without their support, Vallum wouldn't be here today. So thank you so much. And of course, a huge thank you to Joe, Neubert, Matthew James Weigel, Nicole Brossard, and Paul Muldoon for your inspiring and moving readings and this great discussion. Thank you. And finally, to all of you who have tuned in this evening, thank you for coming out and supporting poetry. So
Thank you. Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thank you all. Tremendous fun.